We want to introduce to you a therapist that we are interviewing today who's been in the business about 12 years with Arizona Family Therapy Group, Mr. Garron Griffitts. He specializes in addiction and trauma, adolescence, relationships. He's a wonderful therapist, and we want to pick his brain on some of these topics. All right, so let's talk about, first of all, about anxiety. Talk to us a little bit about what is anxiety, how, and if you could add, how is it affecting teenagers right now?
Yeah, I don't think you can talk about phones, not just social media, but then the pornography and the sexting is such a huge problem. I've asked 2 different adolescent females, 2 different schools. Out of 20 girls, I asked them how many would they imagine have sent an inappropriate picture to someone. Both responded 17 or 18 out of 20. When asked how many have been solicited for something inappropriate, they said close to 100% of young women starting in junior high have been solicited for inappropriate pictures and whatnot from their peers. And then the vast majority of them had at one point given in and sent that. So that's another topic when it comes to phones and problems that we're dealing with them. You know, it's just not social media.
What advice would you give a parent whose daughter said, I did this really awful thing, or I feel really stupid, or I'm really embarrassed, and I've sent this picture of me? How do you help a parent through that?
Well, I think the first thing is you got to respond first with love and let them know that they're not a bad person for doing what they've done. You got to work through it. There might be consequences. They may lose their device. They may not be ready for it. They may have a lot of restrictions put on it. But I think the worst thing we can do is shame a child after some poor decision has been made. It's more of a teaching moment. It's a time I encourage a lot of parents to sit down with their kids and identify their values, or at least let the kids know what the parents' values are, and encourage the kids. And I've encouraged my clients in those situations to look in the mirror and decide what their own values are. Who do they want to be, and what do they want to portray themselves as? But unfortunately, again, it goes back to acceptance and belonging, and that's what kids are struggling with. That's a stress. So if they're not being accepted, but that's a way that they can feel accepted and fit in, then it's a big temptation, and then it becomes a big stressor, and especially for these young women, it just really can affect so much.
A lot of kids view sexting and pornography as a victimless crime or a victimless offense. If it is an offense at all, they view it as sort of a moralistic.
Right.
Are there any intrinsic dangers of sexting and pornography, and what are they? What kind of dangers, either emotionally or physically, are kids experiencing after an episode of sexting or after increased exposure to pornography?
Well, so yeah, what intrinsic challenges and effects does pornography and sexting have on kids? Well, I think it's different for every kid, number one. I think boys versus girls, and then just personality types. I mean, some young women will at least portray that it hasn't affected them too much. Others, it'll affect them greatly. I think that all gets affected. I think most young women that engage in this, it's not their idea. It's 99% the young man encouraging and asking for it. But when there is a challenge, when one young woman told me that pretty much all of her friends have engaged in it, there's not, unfortunately, a negative stigma. I'm the only one doing this. Some of them talk about it, some of them brag about it. It's a badge of honor, it's this, but I think professionally there's a long-term negative effect that's going to hit them, some immediately, but some maybe down the road.
Is there an emotional, is there emotional damage to a child who engages in sexting and pornography because of the ready availability of their cell phone for their future life?
Well, once it's taken and it's out there, it's always going to be out there, as we learned on that good old information highway. And so I think again, personality, some it can affect greatly long term. Others, they may be able to let it roll off their back a little easier. I think self-esteem is almost always affected by these behaviors, whether not noticed immediately down the road or when they're willing to admit it. And again, depending on their age and what grade they're in. The younger ones will be more oblivious to what these effects are. The older ones will really start to feel it.
What effect might the sexting, the pornography, and so forth have on future more personal relationships, marriage, partners, and so forth?
Well, it could. We don't know. I mean, some people are going to be, again, okay with it. I think the scary thing is it'll become a norm where it won't be a big deal. And that's a problem in of itself, where in 5-10 years when these young people are getting married, they've all been engaging in it, whether it's the young man asking for it or providing it himself, whether it's a young woman providing it. It's, unfortunately, I think it's going to be pretty normal. And maybe
Is there something inherently contrary to human nature and wiring and chemistry that would be adversely affected by sexting or pornography at a young age?
That's a good question. I think our natural tendency is to be sexual. I think that in the world in which we live today, which is so pro-open sexuality, from a world standpoint or a societal standpoint, I think people will see it, unfortunately, quite normal and quite, oh, that's just what kids do. I don't know if kids understand the legal ramifications of these behaviors. And from a moralistic, that's what most people look at this more as a moralistic view. And if somebody morally hasn't been taught or doesn't believe themselves that this is anything of consequence, then it'll be interesting to see how it truly does affect them.